The Spanish, Irish, and Norwegian governments announced today that they would recognize a Palestinian state, saying that there would be no end to conflict in the Middle East without it. Israel denounced the move as giving aid to its enemy Hamas. In their coordinated appeal, the leaders of the three countries emphasized that peace could only come through a two-state solution, so a Palestinian state needed to exist. Now, the United States has said recognition of such a state is premature and must be the result of direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. Two of the most prominent figures in the Georgia criminal case against former President Donald Trump easily won their respective elections on Tuesday in their first appearance on the ballot since the inception of the high profile election interference case. Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis defeated challenger Christian Y. Smith in Georgia's Democratic primary as she seeks another 4-year term as Atlanta's top prosecutor. Meanwhile, Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee, who is presiding over the election interference case, also won his first full term since being appointed to the court last year. Nearly 50 House Democrats called on Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito to recuse himself from January 6 related cases, questioning whether the jurist could be impartial after an upside down flag flew at his home in the weeks after the U.S. Capitol attack in 2021. The ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee and 44 other lawmakers signed a letter to Alito noting that the upside down flag is a sign of distress, especially by the U.S. military, and has become a symbol of Stop the Steal, a movement that falsely claims the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. Note that key Republican senators also sharply criticized Alito after news reports regarding the upside down flag. They have called on him to accept responsibility and to ensure that he's not engaged in conduct that would demonstrate any bias. And Sean Diddy Combs has been accused of sexual assault in a new lawsuit filed yesterday by Crystal McKinney. She's the former model and winner of MTV's 1998 Model Mission Competition show. According to her complaint filed in New York on yesterday, she was drugged and sexually assaulted in 2003 by Combs following a men's fashion week event in New York. Crystal McKinney also names Bad Boy Records, John Clothing LLC, and Universal Music Group as she seeks an undetermined amount of damages. And in her first public appearance since she dropped her Republican presidential bid in March, Nikki Haley, you remember her, the former United Nations ambassador, she said today that she would vote for former President Donald Trump. Now, she stopped short of an official endorsement. But she was speaking at the Hudson Institute in Washington when she delivered a scathing critique of Biden and other Republicans on foreign policy. However, she maintained that despite her vehement opposition to Donald Trump just months ago, she is going to vote for him. That's the news of the day, and this is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and this is the hour where we go a little deeper, where we dig behind those headlines and we bring you those stories that people are talking about. And yesterday on the show, we did an analysis of that horrific videotape of Sean Diddy Combs assaulting his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. And we talked about some of the issues that domestic violence victims face with a psychologist and with a Black journalist. We're going to continue our coverage today because the Sean Diddy Combs lawsuit that was filed yesterday puts a bright spotlight back on Diddy and his treatment of women and the various allegations that have been made in now what are 7 civil lawsuits. 7 lawsuits since November of last year have been filed. All of them, for the most part, allege some kind of abuse, whether it's physical or sexual abuse. Many of them name other defendants, including his music and production company, his clothing company, his record label, and other corporations. Also in the news today, one of his former bodyguards is out saying that Diddy had a God complex and that he actually witnessed him use violence against Kim Porter. one of the women that he dated for years, that he actually has children with. Kim is since deceased and can't speak for herself, but this bodyguard says he was there and he witnessed the violence, and not just on one occasion, but on multiple occasions. Also, Misa Hilton, someone else that Diddy had a child with and dated for a number of years, said that she was triggered watching the video of Cassie Ventura being assaulted. And then there's the Los Angeles District Attorney. They came out saying that despite the assault, the criminal assault that we witnessed on that video, that the statute of limitations had run and that their office was not going to be filing any charges against Diddy based on the conduct in that horrific video. Now, however, there is the federal investigation by Homeland Security involving allegations of sex trafficking that we know is still ongoing. Both of Diddy's homes, or at least two of his homes, were raided by Homeland Security officers. And we know in one of the complaints filed against him by a former male producer that he worked with, there were allegations of sex trafficking and the trafficking of underage girls. So obviously, Diddy has a lot of issues, a lot of problems. Many of the brands that he's worked with have distanced themselves. Peloton bikes even said they're going to take his music off of the playlist. So while you're doing your cycling on a Peloton, you will no longer be able to listen to music that was made by P. Diddy. But here's a guy that seemingly was on top of the world, had it all: fame, fortune, beautiful women, beautiful children, daughters and sons, and his whole world has come crashing down. Many people are saying they're not surprised because allegations of physical abuse have swirled around him for decades. Others, however, though, are scratching their heads saying, how can it be? How can it be that someone as public as Diddy, who gave as many big parties as he gave, how could it be that this video of Cassie Ventura is just coming out now? How could it be that these civil lawsuits of sexual assault and physical violence are coming out now, if it is true that these things were happening 2 decades ago, a decade ago? Why weren't more people talking about it? Why weren't more people coming forward, and not just in a gossipy kind of page 6 way talking about it, but in a let's go to law enforcement and report it kind of way? We're going to talk today with a good friend of mine, Dr. Judy Ho. She is a licensed psychologist and knows a lot about treating domestic violence victims. Talk to her about, why didn't Cassie Ventura, and we're assuming she didn't, go forward and make a complaint back in 2006 to law enforcement agencies. This woman, Crystal, who was raped, she said, in 2003, Crystal McKinney, how come she didn't make a report of being raped to law enforcement in New York City? And a good friend, Bobby Grace, is here. He's a veteran prosecutor. He worked for many, many years with that LA District Attorney's Office. Talked to Bobby about this notion that statute of limitations protects, in this case, a predator, someone who is involved in domestic abuse in the worst way possible. What do we need to do to make sure these individuals are held criminally, not just civilly, but criminally accountable when we come forward? All of that on our continuing coverage of the P. Diddy, Sean Combs lawsuits and legal jeopardy right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Hi, Tavis Smiley here. We're getting closer to June 18th, and time is running out for you to register to join us for our historic symposium live on C-SPAN, Tuesday, June 18th, 4 to 7 p.m. at the California Science Center in Exposition Park. Admission is free, but you must register at KBLA1580.com right now if you want to be in the audience when the nation will see for the first time ever a stage full of brilliant Black folk talking about the urgency of now. Climate justice, climate equity, climate resilience. It's all going down. Well, it's actually all going up. Tuesday, June 18th, 4 to 7 p.m. live from the California Science Center in Exposition Park. Again, admission is free, but we're filling up fast. So if I were you, I would log on right now to KBLA1580.com to reserve your seat. caring about the climate, caring about the community. We're KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Ew, gotta get rid of this old Backstreet Boys t-shirt.
Tell me why.
Because it stinks, boys.
Tell me why.
I've washed it so many times, but the odor won't come out.
Tell me why.
No, you tell me why I can't get rid of this odor.
Have you tried Downy Rinse and Refresh? It doesn't just cover up odors, it helps remove them.
Wow, it worked, guys.
Yeah.
Downy Rinse and Refresh removes more odor in one wash than the leading value detergent in 3 washes. Find it wherever you buy laundry products.
The thing no one tells you about periods is that your flow changes every day, and so should your tampon size. Tampax has 5 absorbencies to match your changing flow. If it hurts to remove, go down a size. If it leaks, go up a size. Only Tampax has a leak guard braid to help give you up to 100% leak and odor-free protection. All-day comfort and protection for under $5 a month. Based on average U.S. consumer usage at manufacturer suggested price. However, pricing is at the sole discretion of the retailer. Excludes 8-count packs.
Environmental justice is racial justice.
Environmental justice is social justice.
This is KBLA Talk 1580.
Watch out! You got me!
The galaxy is safe once again.
In the pretend universe, kids play with pretend guns. In the real world, it's up to us to make sure they don't get their hands on a real gun. If you have a gun in the house, keep it locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the...
We are back, and Dr. Judy Ho, a licensed psychologist, and veteran prosecutor Bobby Grace are joining me as we continue our coverage of the lawsuits that have been filed against Sean P. Diddy Combs and the horrific video that was released by CNN on Friday. Welcome, Dr. Ho, and thank you for joining me, and welcome back, Bobby. Bobby, I want to start with you. You worked with the LA District Attorney's Office for a couple of decades. You are a veteran prosecutor. You've seen all kinds of cases. You know backwards and forwards, everything there is to know about statutes of limitations, particularly in cases involving domestic violence. So many people have been wondering what's going to happen to Sean Combs as a result of the conduct we witnessed with our very eyes, related to Cassie Ventura, and also this, notion that's out there, allegation, I should say, that Sean Combs paid security for the Intercontinental Hotel for that video. So talk to us about what the statutes of limitations are for the conduct we witnessed on that video, and if there are any exceptions that might, cause Sean Combs to be held accountable.
Hi, Areva. So generally, the statute of limitations for most crimes in California are going to be approximately 3 years. For misdemeanor crimes, it's just a year. Murder, there is no statute of limitations. And there's been a lot of criminal justice reform measures that have come into play for sex crimes. And so the statute of limitations have been extended for many of the violent sexual conduct. And we've all got kind of a history lesson regarding that, involving the cases of Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby basically walked away from some pretty horrific charges regarding sexual assaults that he committed in Pennsylvania because of statute of limitations. What P. Diddy Combs is charged with, not charged with, but what is alleged here in California is a crime that would fit within the 3-year statute of limitations. And it would only be told, meaning it only would be stalled if, for some reason, the facts weren't known. In this case, that won't be applicable here. And so that is likely why the LA County District Attorney's Office came forward and, did a press conference to say, not a press conference, but a press statement to say that there would be no prosecution here because of the statute of limitations.
Now, Bobby, is there a separate 5-year statute for some forms of domestic violence? I'm aware of the 3-year assault statute of limitations, but I thought there was a slightly longer 5 years. It still wouldn't be applicable in this case because of the time frame in which this happened. But is there a longer 5-year statute for some forms of domestic violence in
So,
California?
so some forms of domestic violence, if it involves aggravating circumstances, great bodily injury, and or something else may be involved in terms of alcohol being involved, drugs being involved. But again, that doesn't seem to be the case here.
And just lastly on this point about what we witnessed in that horrific video, what about the allegations that he may have paid a security company or the hotel or someone to hide that video? You know, you think about mandatory reporters, right? So if a kid goes to school and they have a big bruise on their head, teachers, principals are all mandatory reporters. They've got to call law enforcement. They've got to call Child Protective Services. But people are wondering how come this hotel didn't have any obligation to reveal. Presumably, they saw this video. They saw it in real time. They saw it as it was happening or shortly thereafter. Would there have been any obligation on the part of any of those hotel employees to contact law enforcement, or could they have been, face any criminal charges for selling this video to Sean Combs, or agreeing not to make it available for $50,000?
Well, unfortunately, the statute of limitations is going to come into play here with respect to possible state charges as it relates to the selling or hiding of that tape. California doesn't have what is known as a Good Samaritan law. And so in most cases, unless you are a legal mandatory reporter, you're not required to, quote unquote, tell on somebody. Getting to your point about the actual sale or the alleged sale of that tape, that could be a federal crime. As you know, if they did sell that and they didn't report it as income in other tax filings, it could be possible that they could be brought or swept into some IRS claim, or alternatively, if the federal government goes forward on kind of a semi-RICO, meaning overarching conspiracy case under federal law, which it seems like the federal government is at least contemplating with respect to Sean Combs, it could be part of a broader RICO conspiracy to sex trafficking. And as part of that, using violence to intimidate women, to keep men, because there may be men that were involved in this, intimidate people from coming forward. And that could be part of a broader action that could toll statute of limitations and allow the federal government to bring charges on something that is typically state charges. They usually would not be involved in just a simple assault case or even a simple rape case, sexual assault case. So there's a lot of things that are in play here. And unfortunately, Areva, in terms of just the simple facts of what happened in that hotel room, it looks like he may escape liability.
Yeah. So, Dr. Ho, that of course brings us to the question of how come someone like Cassie Ventura, we know at the time she was just 19 years old, and now this new civil complaint by Crystal McKinney, who's alleging that she was sexually assaulted when she was 22 years old back in 2003. People are asking how come these women didn't go to law enforcement at the time that these assaults, in Cassie's case, that physical assault that we witnessed, and in Crystal McKinney's case, the sexual assault that she said occurred to her in 2003. Is that common that someone will be brutalized in the way we watched Cassie Ventura brutalized in that video and not reported to law enforcement?
Yeah, Areva, it's really sad, but it's very common that it's not reported to law enforcement. And most of the times, it's not even reported to friends or family members. And sometimes with friends and family members, people who are victims of intimate partner violence try to keep it away from their friends and family. Sometimes it's because the partner actually controls the narrative and controls their whereabouts and who they speak to, but other times it's because they're protective of their partner, even as their partner is abusing them. And they don't want their friends and family to worry about them or to develop negative ideas or opinions about their partner. They may feel very conflicted about whether or not they still want to have a relationship with the partner. Oftentimes, there is a power dynamic difference between them and the abusing partner. So they're afraid to lose whatever little support they see they have with the partner. And I thought that it was also interesting that generally, people who are different, of varying backgrounds, especially from ethnic minority backgrounds, they do face higher rates of intimate partner violence. So about 63.8% of women who identify as ethnic minority or multiracial or biracial, they experience intimate partner violence just overall over the last 10 years. That's one of the statistics. And females are a little higher than males, with it being 63% of females and 51% of males.
So, Bobby, given that statistics and given, what Dr. Ho said about the fact that oftentimes victims don't come forward because they are controlled by the abuser, there's a whole myriad of reasons, fear, shame, etc., why they don't come forward. Do is there any effort being made at the district attorney's office at the state level to change that statute of limitations, to make it longer, knowing that in a lot of cases, as Dr. Ho said, women aren't going to come forward, particularly not immediately. It may take years for them to gain the courage or to break away from their abuser. It just seems so unfair to have 3 years, basically, to report and to hold someone criminally responsible.
So what we've seen across the country is a tremendous response to the Me Too movement. And so we have seen the statute of limitation lengthen for many of the sexual assault crimes that we saw that were being reported. Unfortunately, simple violence, and it's not simple, I'm just using that term, has not been included in many of the different reform measures, packages that are going through the different state legislatures. But I do think that these instances that are coming up now with Sean Combs and some other people, because I do think that these lawsuits, lengthening the statute of limitations for the lawsuits, are going to force the hands of many of the state legislatures, because everybody's saying, kind of like the question that you're posing, Areva, is if they can go after them civilly, why can't we go after them from a criminal standpoint? And it just doesn't seem fair that Sean Diddy Combs will be able to make a public apology for such a violent act and that he can't be held accountable for it. So I do think that you're going to see some measures happening in state legislatures across the country to also try to lengthen the statute of limitations for violent crimes, not just sexual assault.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that apology up, because that was a pretty sickening statement that he made. And you and I, as lawyers, know, Bobby, had there been any possibility that he could be prosecuted for what we witnessed in that video, he would not have made that apology. He would not have, gone on his Instagram and talked to millions of people making a statement, because that would be something that would have been used against him in a criminal prosecution. But obviously he's got lawyers around him, and they knew that the district attorney was not going to be able to move forward with criminal prosecution. So he goes on Dr. Ho Instagram and talks about being in a dark place and blah, blah, blah. Just, a lot of mumbo jumbo, particularly since a couple of months ago when the lawsuits were filed, he said they were money grabs and they were sickening allegations against him that were categorically false. One thing we're learning from his former bodyguard, Dr. Ho, a man by the name of Roger Bonds, he says that Diddy had a God syndrome. He calls it, he said he was a king manipulator. Based on what you know, and I know you haven't evaluated him, he's not your patient, but just on what you've read and what you've seen, do those statements seem to be accurate statements or fair statements to make about him, given this apology that he's made and given the way that he's handled himself in light of these allegations?
Well, it just seems that the story keeps changing, right? So earlier on, he's saying these are money grabs. I will defend my name and clear this up. I basically have never done any of these things that anyone has ever alleged. I mean, he basically put a very fine point on that. It was basically in the history of his life, he would never ever say, yes, this allegation is actually what occurred. And then when you look at his Instagram apology, and I just see that basically he's saying, yes, that was a dark time in my life, what you saw in the hotel video. And I went to get care. I went to get mental health treatment. I went to rehab, whatever it was I needed to reform. But then now you have this bodyguard who says, no, Miss Ventura was not the only victim of this. This is something that he's done as a pattern, and he basically thinks that he can get away with anything. So then you really have to question, what's the sincerity of that? Was that just his attempt at cleaning up his image for the media? You know, how many more victims are there potentially? And this is a pattern. It's not just one dark time in his life. It was a pattern across various points in his life.
Yeah, well, I want to talk, Bobby, when we come forward about this guy, this Roger Bond, who's out talking so openly about witnessing violence against Kim Porter. One of Diddy's the women that he dated for a long time, had kids with. D.L. Hughley, I think, put it best when he says these people like Roger Bond, they're not witnesses, they're accomplices. And what type of criminal liability might they face? They being the many people who we know have witnessed the violence that Sean Combs used against women and in some cases men. In many of these civil lawsuits, there are other defendants named. There are individuals who are named. There are businesses that are named. There are record companies. There are clothing companies. And so it begs the question about, all the folks that were engaged in enabling and protecting and hiding this violence. Might they face not just civil liability, but perhaps criminal liability as well? Stay with us when we come forward. More on Sean Diddy Combs and the multiple lawsuits that have been filed against him, right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Right time. More of Areva Martin in real time when we come forward.
I'm Tyreek Wayne. Here's the latest on the Black Information Network. Family, friends, and colleagues of the late Cook County, Illinois clerk Karen Yarborough continue to remember her time in office. A special meeting of County Board Commissioners was held to honor the longtime politician. Mayor Brandon Johnson was among the speakers. New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who's black, is criticizing pro-Palestinian protesters while defending police for arresting demonstrators in Brooklyn over the weekend. Adams says protesters blocked traffic, climbed on top of a bus, and spit at police officers in Bay Ridge. Video shows officers shoving protesters towards the sidewalks, dragging others, and punching several demonstrators while taking them into custody. President Biden is urging black voters to show up at the polls in November. He spoke to the Detroit branch of the NAACP's Fight for Freedom Fund dinner and was given a Lifetime Achievement Award from the group. Biden addressed concerns about being 81 years old and said he feels pretty inspired. That's the latest. I'm Tyreek Wynn on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network.
Your evening drive through Santa Monica's 10 East between 20th Street and the 5-101 interchange remains over 2.5 hours. Mid-City's 10 West at La Brea Avenue, watch for an accident that remains on the right shoulder with a 15-20 minute backup from Highway 60. SIG alert's been issued over in North Hollywood as a crash remains in 3 right lanes involving a pickup truck that went into a big rig on the 170 North after Oxnard Street. Right now, stop traffic is coming from the 101-134 freeway up to about 25-30 minutes. And if you're out in Norwalk 605 North before Firestone Boulevard, a crash is in the right lane with heavy traffic coming from the 105 Imperial Highway interchange.
Hi, I'm Kyle at Blindster.com. Shopping for new blinds? At Blindster, we offer over 50 different blinds, shades, and shutters at low prices, custom made for your windows, and shipping is free. Shop at home and order 10 free samples of any product before you buy. Blindster.com.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Rams are moving their training camp this summer to the campus of Loyola Marymount University. The Rams had trained at UC Irvine since 2016. The Chargers will also have a new home this summer for training camp. They'll be at a new facility in El Segundo. The Chargers decided to move from Costa Mesa. 5 NFL teams will be conducting their training camps this summer in Southern California. In addition to the Chargers and Rams, the Raiders, New Orleans Saints, and Dallas Cowboys will be in the area for training camp. The NBA Western Conference Finals begins tonight in Minneapolis. The Timberwolves versus the Dallas Mavericks. First time for the T-Wolves in the Western Conference Finals in 20 years. The Mavericks were in the conference finals in 2022 against Golden State. They lost to Golden State in 5 games. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580. That's right. Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580. We've got a lot to talk about. By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Got your black. Follow the leader in the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
I have diabetes. I'm at risk for pneumococcal pneumonia.
I have asthma. I'm at risk too.
If you're 19 or older with chronic conditions like asthma, diabetes, COPD, or heart disease, or are 65 or older, you are at increased risk for pneumococcal pneumonia. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Prevnar 20, pneumococcal 20-valent conjugate vaccine, a Pfizer vaccine that can help protect you against pneumococcal pneumonia in just one dose. Even if you've already been vaccinated with other pneumonia vaccines, Prevnar 20 may help provide added protection. Prevnar 20 is approved for adults to help prevent infections from 20 strains of the bacteria that cause pneumococcal pneumonia. Continued approval may depend on a supportive study. Don't get Prevnar 20 if you've had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients. Adults with weakened immune systems may have a lower response to the vaccine. Side effects include pain and swelling at the injection site, fatigue, headache, muscle, and joint pain. For full prescribing information, please call 1-855-213-2138 or visit Prevnar20.com.
Family Talk with Straight Talk.
You give and you give. It's time to get with Straight Talk Wireless. You get a reliable 5G network and unlimited data, and you get to choose who joins your family plan starting as low as $25 a line. Does it have to be family? It can be family or people you like.
Get more lines and more savings. Switch to Straight Talk for family plan starting as low as $25 a line per month for 4 lines. Find us at Walmart and straighttalk.com. For network management practices, visit straighttalk.com. Family plan discount with 4 lines, all on the Silver Unlimited plan. Taxes and fees apply.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
We are back, and in this hour, we're talking about the 7th lawsuit that has been filed against Sean Combs, alleging sexual assault. This is by a former model who says that Sean Combs sexually assaulted her when she was 22 years old after a men's fashion event in New York. She said she was drugged, forced into a bathroom, and forced to perform oral sex on Sean Combs. This lawsuit comes after an explosive and horrific video was released of Sean Combs assaulting Cassie Ventura, someone who he was dating back in the early 2000s. And the question is, what accountability, if any, will Sean Combs face, not just in these civil lawsuits, but is there a potential for criminal accountability as well? And we're also talking about domestic violence victims, because there's a lot of misinformation out in the universe about women, particularly as victims of domestic violence. So many people have this notion that, you know, the women are somehow responsible because they don't run into a police department and make a report, that they're somehow responsible because they go back and into these relationships, or in some cases stay in relationships once they've been abused. Dr. Judy Ho, a licensed psychologist, and veteran former LA County prosecutor Bobby Grace are joining me. Bobby, I also want to talk about accomplices. So in many of the lawsuits that have been filed against Sean Combs, the civil lawsuits, there are multiple defendants. And Roger Bonds, this former security officer for Sean Combs, is talking to Piers Morgan and talks about himself witnessing Sean use violence against Kim Porter, the late Kim Porter. And it raises the question about people who enable abusers. It came up a lot in the Bill Cosby case, managers, agents, executive assistants, all of these people who we know powerful men like this have in their orbit, who we know they're doing this in plain view in many cases. What happens to those individuals? Why aren't they held responsible in some way?
Well, you touched on a lot of the reasons coming into our discussion before we went to the break. Again, the statute of limitations has not been stretched in order to include violent crimes that did not include sexual assault. So Roger Bond probably feels comfortable talking about what happened with Kim Porter because, again, there's no Good Samaritan law in New York or in California. We're not sure exactly where these incidents occurred with Kim Porter, but let's say they happened in New York. There is no Good Samaritan law, but we do know that he's facing scrutiny by federal prosecutors. And we also know that it appears that that investigation centers on sex trafficking. So if it turns out that Mr. Bond was part of any incidents where people were being brought to Sean Combs's home, and he was aware of the fact that Sean Combs was involved in violent acts, sexual assault, which appears he may, he could have talked himself into, or at least brought himself under scrutiny by federal prosecutors in terms of what he knows about other incidents that happened during that particular time period. And if he was aware of, for example, Sean Combs drugging people, and or was he aware of people being brought across state lines for purposes of sexual acts? These are all things that the feds are looking at. And if Mr. Bond knows anything about that, he could be in trouble.
Yeah, I just feel like that DA issued that press statement about the statute of limitations, and folks have gone crazy just talking, saying things that you and I know as lawyers they would never probably say if there were the threat of a statute, ignoring, as you have pointed out a couple of times now, the fact that there is a federal investigation, at least that we've been told is taking place, as evidenced by the raid on Sean Combs's homes in Miami and in Los Angeles. So those folks may be doing a lot of talking that's going to end up, being used against them, or finding them, or putting them in jeopardy, or putting them in the middle of some of these investigations. Doctor, I really want to make sure that this conversation is just not about predators and abusers like Sean Combs, but really about victims, because there's a lot of misinformation, swirling around about victims. And even on my social media pages, people were commenting about the fact that these women, in their opinions, are complicit because they didn't leave, or because they continue to stay in these relationships. We know Cassie Ventura, for example, the abuse we witnessed on that videotape happened in 2006. But she remained in a relationship with Sean Combs for many years after that. Can you just disabuse people of some notion that victims themselves are complicit because they remain in a relationship with someone that is abusive?
Of course, Areva. And I think the response that you're getting on your social media pages, it is maybe the kind of the prevailing ideas about, well, if you're not leaving, then who are you blaming? You should be blaming yourself. And it's really not that easy to leave abusive relationships. It takes people on average 5 to 7 attempts before they successfully leave. And about 1 in 4 women and about 1 in 9 men do experience severe intimate partner physical violence at some point in their lives. And so it's a big proportion of the population. And a lot of what happens in the victims' minds is that these partners are not horrible people all the time. They have times when they're loving. They have times when they're supportive. They promise to change. And when you care about somebody and you love them, sometimes when you are in that position where you've become a victim, it's a gradual process. It's not like they've become abusive in the first month of dating and you think you should just get out of it right away. Usually there's been a period of a honeymoon. Maybe there's still these positive traits you're looking forward to coming back in the relationship. And also, as I alluded to earlier when we spoke about this, people do find themselves in these discrepant power dynamics. So it's not the easiest thing to leave. They may not have the resources to leave. They may not know where they're going to live. What about their children? What about other people who are also connected to their partner? And I think there's also the fear of retaliation oftentimes, again, because of that power dynamic difference is, well, if I leave and they come after me, they have all these resources. They can grab me back. They can take other people away from my life. So those fears can sometimes also keep people in a very complicit place, and definitely quiet and definitely not going to law enforcement.
Yeah, it's just so annoying, I guess, and frustrating that people are so quick to blame the victim in these situations. And as much, research has been done, as much as the Me Too movement, you have exposed things like you just talked about in terms of the power dynamics. There's still such a male-centered, male-focused approach when we even talk about these issues. And Bobby, even on sex trafficking, people will say things like, well, she's an adult, she agreed to it. So can you give us legally what sex trafficking is? Because I think people have in their minds, a definition about sex trafficking that's just wrong.
You're talking about an individual who is either voluntarily or involuntarily having someone exchange sexual favors for money. And as you know, sex trafficking and the whole area of sex trafficking has changed so much in just the last 10 years. We used to talk about it as prostitution. We used to talk about it as prosecuting women, primarily women, for sexual acts. That's all changed. Now the focus in terms of law enforcement is on the individuals who are have the power dynamic, if you will, with respect to trafficking. Unfortunately, major cities like Los Angeles, New York, we're experiencing terrible problems with respect to sex trafficking that our local officials have not been able to get a handle on. We're kind of in this gray area where government doesn't want to quote unquote outlaw the women or men engaging in sexual acts for money. It's still against the law, but most jurisdictions are not prosecuting it, and they're focusing on the sex trafficking part of it. But unfortunately, it's becoming a major issue across Los Angeles. You can, anytime after a certain hour in certain areas of the city, you see, the explosion of sexual trafficking going on. And primarily it's fueled by men who are either forcing or using other women to get an increasingly younger women, Areva, involved in the sex trafficking trade. And unfortunately, so many of these women are children, and so many of these women are foster children, and so many of these women are being preyed upon by gang members, other individuals who are taking advantage of the situation. And so we've got a long way to go in terms of the criminal justice system, in terms of coming up with a sensible approach in terms of going after sex traffickers. And in terms of this particular, what we've been talking about, and especially with the federal government, they seem to focus on going after individuals who are transporting women and men across the state or even across the country for the purposes of sex trafficking. And also, Areva, that involves a lot of times children. And it's a major issue in foreign countries where individuals from the United States, other major Western countries, go to other third world countries to have illegal sex with children in other countries. So sex trafficking is a major issue across the world.
When we come forward, I want to talk about breaking the stigma and really what it's going to take to have women feel empowered to be able to tell these stories. These lawsuits, whenever, the spotlight is on them, we start to hear about more and more of them. So as Bobby just said, this is a huge issue. It's a hidden issue in many communities. But when you have a high profile person like Sean Combs accused of the kinds of acts that he's been accused of in 7 different lawsuits, it gives us an opportunity to talk about how do we break the stigma and keep women, primarily women who are domestic violence victims, how do we keep them safe? More when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
To help combat climate change, LADWP is helping neighborhoods have better access to electric vehicles by awarding nearly $130 million in EV rebates to customers just like you. From big savings on used EVs to building new charging plazas, LADWP is charging ahead to help all Angelenos experience the benefits of EVs. Get rebates of up to $4,000 for a used EV and $1,750 for a charger. Learn more at ladwp.com/EV. That's ladwp.com/EV.
Have you been a victim or witness to hate or discrimination? Contact the California vs. Hate hotline to report the incident by calling 833-8-NO-HATE or visit cavshate.org. They'll help you access resources and support, including legal, financial, mental health, and mediation services. California vs. Hate is not affiliated with the police, and you can report anonymously. Use your voice. Report hate by calling 833-8-NO-HATE or visit cavshate.org. Res Radio 91.3.
Hey, LA residents, it's planting season and the perfect time to get shade trees growing around your home. LADWP and City Plants are giving every resident up to 7 free trees. That's right, 7 free trees delivered right to your door. Trees are great for the environment, help improve air quality, and can help you save on your bill when you use less air conditioning to stay cool indoors. Learn more at ladwp.com/free trees. That's ladwp.com/free trees.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, home of the 2024 Climate Justice Campaign. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Stay Housed LA has the resources you need to know your rights and the legal support to back them up. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost people their jobs and livelihoods. This has left an estimated 1/3 of households not being able to make rent and facing losing their homes. This is a fear no one in our community should have to face. You have rights, though, and Stay Housed LA is here to help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, and local community and legal service providers. Together, they provide tenants with the information and support needed to exercise their rights so they can remain safely in their homes. Find out more about your rights by participating in a virtual tenant workshop. Get the legal assistance you need. Find additional resources in Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA County for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. That's stayhousedla.org. Or call their hotline at 213-694-0040. We've got your black with a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Before the break, Dr. Ho, Bobby talked about the shift in the way that women and men are prosecuted with respect to sex trafficking. We don't talk about women as being prostitutes anymore. We don't talk about prostitution. We talk about sex trafficking. We talk about women being coerced and being pressured into performing sexual acts for money. So obviously, as Bobby also said, there's a lot more work to be done, a lot of ways that we've got to shift our policies and our state laws to make it easier for women to come forward and give them longer periods of time when they have been in abusive relationships. But from your standpoint as a psychologist, what else should we be doing as a society to break the stigma that makes it difficult for women to come forward? I was just talking to a good friend of mine who was in a very long abusive marriage, and she's out of it, but she just had to engage with her ex-husband because of a family event. And she said she was so triggered and she cried, she said, for an entire week because she felt so bad about how her negative relationship with her husband, her abusive relationship, impacted her children, and she's watching her children now have difficult intimate partner relationships, and she thinks a lot of it is because she modeled, there's this horrible relationship she had with her husband. So she's even feeling, this shame and this stigma. How do we start to break some of that?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And thank you so much for sharing that experience because I think it does speak to not only the self stigma and the self shame that many women feel when abuse has happened to them, but also just what society expects and the kind of questions and conversations that society, people in general have when they hear that something like this happened. You and I both know that oftentimes women are blamed in various ways if they have been exposed to any kind of sexual or physical trauma, like, well, what did you do? Or what were you wearing? Or where were you at the time? Were you drinking? Were you using drugs? As if all of those things would then just make it okay that this happened to them or that somehow they deserved it. But more so than anything, I think once they hear this kind of message from one or two people, they just shut down. They don't want to talk to anybody else. And I see that a lot in my practice where a patient will say, I told one person, and then when they talk to me in the way that they did, it just made me feel like it was unsafe to tell anyone else, or they change their narrative and they just suffer in silence. And so I think it's just so important that when you hear this from somebody in your social circle or when it's part of your professional work and somebody discloses this to you, that the types of responses that you have and the types of questions that you ask should really come from a place of wanting to share that empathy and understanding without peppering them so much with questions they feel like they have to defend themselves, or even making certain comments that make it sound like they should have been responsible for what happened to them. And so sometimes the best thing to do, if you're not 100% sure of what to do, is just practice active listening. So if somebody is coming to you with this information, it might have taken them a long time to get to this place with you, whether it's a professional or a social setting. So just say, okay, well, please tell me more about that. You don't have to respond with your opinion. You don't have to say, well, I can't believe that happened to you. Is this the first time it happened to you? I mean, we don't have to ask all of these questions that sound like there's some kind of insinuation or some other kind of context. I think that we can just stick to, asking open-ended questions, asking them, well, what can I do to support you now that you've told me this? And even if you do have some personal reactions, we all have probably some extent biases, but when you're talking to somebody who might be a victim, try really hard not to express that part. If you know that there's a part of you that has certain ideas, just practice active listening, open up to them, let them talk to you, and ask them, what can you do to help, without insinuating what you think you should do to help.
That's really good advice. And one of the things too, Bobby, that we're seeing in terms of shifting attitudes is a shift in believing women, particularly Black women. We know that it's been very difficult for a lot of women to come forward because when they did, they were often vilified. They were the ones who were maligned. They lost jobs, they lost their reputation. And our society, being a patriarchal society, we work real hard to protect men, to protect their jobs, to protect their status. He's a working man. He has a wife and children. We've got to protect his reputation. So we've seen some shifts in that regard. What can you tell us about the believability, this notion that some people have, and Diddy wanted us to have, that when a woman comes forward, of course, it's got to be for money. It can't be true. These have to be false allegations. And you're going after me because I'm a rich man, because you just want money. But the research that I've seen suggests that when women report sexual assault, overwhelmingly, they are telling the truth, that there is not a large number of women that make up crimes of sexual assault. Is that what your experience has been as a prosecutor?
Yeah, Areva, we're talking usually about, or what we've been talking about are celebrity people who have that built-in defense that they're coming after money. But the majority of people who come within the criminal justice system and just the everyday people, they're just regular folks that don't have a lot of money. We do have this concept of battered women syndrome, and it's been out there for a lot of time. Dr. Judy was talking about some of the aspects of battered women syndrome, and it's a law in most states. There's now legislation that allows prosecutors to put on the whole history of violence between individuals, and then we can put on experts to talk about a lot of the things that Dr. Judy was talking about in court, so that juries can understand exactly what you're talking about, Areva, that when women come forward, when they finally come forward, women and men, when they finally come forward, it's usually at a point where they've just gotten to a breaking point and they're telling the truth about what happened. And it's really just giving people an opportunity, jurors in this case, an opportunity to see the full picture of what's going on and put it in context. So, for example, if Sean Diddy Combs did ultimately end up in a courtroom, a lot of his history with all of these different partners may be allowed to come into play. You know that we can go all the way back to his relationship with Jennifer Lopez and all of those things that were happening back in that time that may suggest a pattern of his attitudes toward women, his relationships that could come into play later on if there is a prosecution that comes forward. And maybe the good thing about this, Dr. Judy, is that more attention is going to be paid to the regular folks who face this kind of violence on a day-to-day basis, and they'll get more justice in court as time goes on.
No, you're so right. Obviously, these high-profile cases are the ones that get the media attention, whether it's Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, or Sean Combs. But the average person, who doesn't have a big profile, isn't a music mogul, who suffers some kind of intimate partner violence, may have some of the same issues in terms of shame and fear of coming forward. Dr. Judy, before we leave, we got a minute left. Just give us some resources or a number or something that someone can call if they find themselves in a abusive relationship, or if they know someone who is in an abusive relationship. What can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, both of you, for your insights in this discussion. So there's a National Domestic Violence Hotline. This is confidential support 24/7, 365 days a week. It's also really helpful for people who know somebody who is going through this and wanting to know how you can support them. And so you can call 1-800-799-SAFE, or that's 7233. You can also text 88788. Again, it is confidential, but if you go to the website, which is thehotline.org, there's a number of resources, whether you might be a victim yourself or you know somebody who might need some help.
Thank you so much. We are out of time. Thank you, Dr. Judy. Good to see you, my friend. And always a pleasure to spend time with you, Bobby. Great advice. Both of you. Can't thank you enough for this conversation. When we come forward, Robin Ayers and the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us. Thanks, guys.
After a Florida shooting, running back Brian Battie, who is black, and several others were hurt when shots were fired in